Welcome for this first episode of Yieldseekers. I'm glad to see everyone here. We are gathered here with a few entrepreneurs and investors, a group I have known for quite some time. Happy to be here for the first time, guys.
Absolutely special.
Let's take a moment to find our path.
Absolutely, yes.
Just quickly, Dirk Van Dam, lawyer. I've known him for quite a while, since 2012, for quite a long time indeed. Mark Soons, Mr. Cashflow, this time from the car, banished to the car. Plus, Mark Wesselink, here from Venture Rock, the startup king, so to speak. Yes, we will chat nicely today.
That's right, and there are plenty of themes to discuss. We could fill entire days with them.
Indeed, yes. It was a rather hectic week last week.
Incredible.
The amusing clips featuring Putin alongside a tiny dog with Trump's head frequently appear on WhatsApp.
What AI can do these days. Yes, indeed.
A dispute with Zelensky while Trump occupies the seats. It's quite amusing to see how that unfolded.
Indeed, yes.
And also Trump's hair flying back and forth. I find that quite impressive.
Incredible how that works now. Yes, I thought that the week when this period roughly started was marked by the biggest joke, upside-down Delta commercials, after that amusing landing in Toronto. But indeed, more things have happened. Incredible. Indeed, but I believe there's plenty to discuss.
Of course, we have a busy agenda, so let's go ahead and tackle the first item on our list right away. The CPU statistics of the European Union. A 2.4% expectation for 2.3. The previous figure was 2.5. Inflation in the Netherlands is naturally somewhat higher. So what impact will this have, gentlemen? It appears we are still at a reasonable inflation rate. But with America and everything that's happening, Doge, could that possibly change again?
Yes, if Trump actually implements his intention to impose those tariffs on the EU. That can only have inflationary effects, it seems to me. I'm not sure how you view it, but it looks like it's coming if I read the news right.
Yes, you can see it clearly. Canada, Mexico, they are already moving forward with it. Canada intends to join the EU shortly. I believe they will rethink their stance upon seeing Trump's impact on Europe. But yes, very interesting times. I do agree with Dirk, this can do nothing else than to tackling inflation. I'm quite curious about how our position, which isn't very good, will develop now.
On the other hand, as you said, when defense spending increased in America, it didn't immediately lead to inflation. At least that wasn't the core reason for inflation. We're doing that in Europe now. Von der Leyen said this morning that we are going to restock. So what does that actually look like?
I see the energy supply of the European Union as a problem in the long run. I don't know how that will go from the United States regarding the sanctions against Russia. It seems to me a major problem if Trump says we are lifting sanctions and won't enforce them anymore. We're going to do business with Russia again. Europe would enforce those sanctions, I believe. That would create a very skewed relationship, especially in the energy market, I think. What I gather, especially from Germany, is that the current energy developments are creating significant issues for the industry, together with a decreasing demand for particularly German cars. Germany, the driving force of Europe's economy. These are challenging times, and I'm very curious to see how it will play out. But I think the energy prices and energy supply, I would think, that those are crucial factors influencing Europe's economic outlook. Do you agree?
Indeed. I say there's always a bright side to every setback. Interest rates are falling. Thus, this is beneficial for the startup sector, as it means they will no longer generate any income from their bank savings. There's nothing more to add, so they really need to invest. Let it come. That's what I would say. We have indeed experienced quite a standstill in risk-taking and capital over the past 2.5 years. The startup ecosystem definitely needs a boost in innovation. Every drawback has a benefit. For example, do you understand that they...
So you get an additional attempt.
Well, then you say something, because indeed I heard that too. Sometimes I think at night that Europe needs a moment of freedom. That's my idea. This is, of course, in the field of defense. We've been sleeping for years in Europe. But especially, Mark, you make a good point. People often say there are no serious tech firms in Europe. All comes from America.
Yes, but there is indeed a heavy part. There are indeed plenty of wonderful tech companies, Agen, Mistral, a pioneer in AI, all from Europe. And it has also been shown that we manage capital much more efficiently. America can indeed pour billions into a pit that goes down the drain. But yes, we do need to switch gears with Europe because we are becoming a bit lazy. Europeans are already innovating while others are not. I think that by raising the defense budget, which will truly drive innovation, the startup ecosystem in Europe will receive a significant boost. And I hope that, especially through the Netherlands, but also through France nowadays, the pension funds will contribute. Companies with pension funds in Europe will increasingly allocate budgets for French capital and early stage investments because they are 90% behind compared to their American counterparts. For startups, I think this is a very good momentum.
Well,
Then consider how you engage with the Middle East, a place I also visit often. If you see how they're working on innovation there, they really don't mind where an entrepreneur originates, as long as you have a solid idea and the motivation to execute it. Yes, it doesn't matter much. They prefer that someone establishes themselves in the Middle East. Yeah, but honestly, that's just a facade, because it's merely a mailbox and you're done. That's roughly what they expect from you. Indeed, they are completely invested, and I get the impression that both of them are involved. It doesn't matter where they come from, even if they come from Europe. And we throw just as much money at it as Americans do. A few Harvard-educated individuals. Investment managers working for venture firms in the Middle East. However, on the other hand, I also feel that they don't fully understand what they are doing yet.
No, I've always joked about that. Germans are not great at innovation. They tend to be overly cautious. In a successful startup, you must make many experimental errors to discover what works. That's simply not part of the German character or DNA, because they want to create something immediately, and it has to happen very well for them. And they are already 6 years ahead with the first version of a product. It's kind of the same in the Middle East. We attempted to establish a fund in the Middle East as well, a venture studio investment fund. You can clearly see that 99% of the limited partners, the LPs and the investors, are primarily in real estate and private equity. And they really don't understand anything about startups and innovation at all. They just ask the same questions over and over. You fail to see that you are genuinely engaged in experimentation and learning. You don't get that. That's pretty tough in those contradictions, because don't forget, making mistakes is not part of the culture there. You need to make mistakes at the beginning because you're really doing something at the startup that no one knows how it works. Thus, you must learn by making mistakes and figuring out what works. That's not in the middle class culture, just so you know.
no, that's a culture of consequences. If you make a mistake, you'll have to pay for it, so to speak. That's a setback. That's true. It's quite comparable to what you're saying about Germany right now. I've always been so surprised by the limited internet coverage in Germany. It's really quite strange.
You still can't use a card to pay in some stores, Dirk. And you just have to stand there. Sorry, you can only pay cash, indeed.
But that's the entire fuss with the European Union. I mean, so you go to Belgium alone, and then Vodafone stops working, and then you have Vodafone again afterwards. And then driving to Antwerp, you have almost no reception in about half an hour. You sort of drive past the Wadden Islands. I have no clue why. But that's simply sad. What I mean is, we are one European Union, but we are not fully integrated, although we are integrated. What are we actually? And what I find absurd about this development is, if you look at it historically, every crisis that Europe has faced economically is a transition to the next phase. In fact, if you examine America, the federation and central government emerged from a crisis. It originated from the central government needing to borrow money, because the individual states could no longer do so. You can see that we are doing exactly that in Europe right now. Since COVID, the ECB has started borrowing at a lower amount than most member states can, but without really having an idea of how centrally Europe will repay that. And now, of course, the repayment capacity is initially viewed as levies. Environmental fees, everything related to the EU. But at some point, that just won't work anymore. Then you'll really have a European tax. And why do I think that? It's because politicians have no other choice. The road of least resistance is ultimately just saying, but it's Brussels' fault. That's easy. Instead of saying, I'm going to impose local taxes, new taxes to send to Europe. How appealing does that sound? Well, nobody likes that. So what will you do? Then you will say, So Europe has taxes now, and then we will go to, in the end, what truly matters, I have to say honestly, for this experiment to succeed, is essentially a monetary union.
Yes, a European capital market. And I think that we must also move towards that. When you observe, particularly from my sector, the challenges of investing in startups beyond the border are quite significant. We possess 26 distinct legal entities across Europe. In America, 80% of all businesses in America are based in Delaware. I'm not sure Musk would agree, but that's another matter entirely. And we simply need and we must indeed work towards a uniform capital market. If you take a moment to examine the various exchanges in Europe, they all have a somewhat similar vibe. However, combined, it creates a massive capital market. We must not forget Europe as an economic power if we create a European capital union. Is the biggest incumbent. 400 million people versus 300 million Americans. That's perfectly fine. Israel is taking part in the European Eurovision Song Festival this year. So I think Israel will also join the European Union. It will grow larger. Australia is also joining all the member states of the European Eurovision.
What I have always found remarkable, even during the introduction of the euro, a monetary union, there seems to be only advantages to it, one would think. But can that really happen? And I believe that is also a root cause of the issues we are discussing now, if you don't combine it with a fiscal union. I think that's the case. What we are talking about now is unity, yet it also reflects a lack of unity.
Yes, but Dirk, the United States is a union, although each state has its own tax system. They are two of the states. Everyone thinks of America, America, but each state has a separate tax system. Of course, you also have a federal tax, but you still have other state taxes.
That doesn't count. Everyone speaks one language, unlike here in Europe. We all have different languages and cultures.
Once upon a time, but if you just go to the heart of Madrid now, you can easily chat in English and order a beer. That wasn't true a decade or so ago.
But now it is. It's more the idea that America doesn't speak the same language in each state. If you observe the differences in each state, they could theoretically be speaking the same language. However, the inefficiencies are massive when you look at them. The Deutsch has now shown just the tip of the iceberg of corruption. But what they are really about is the inefficiency, which is enormous. All you have to do is request a tin as a business. A company identification number. Well, it's a hell of a neighborhood, I can tell you. Getting a social security number takes about 3 months if you move there. And by that time, Trump might have already deported you. There's a lot of potential to improve. Tax systems differ by state. I worked in Maryland, and being close to Delaware creates issues. If you reside in Delaware and work in Maryland, you need to complete a double tax treaty form as if you were European. It's quite remarkable how it doesn't work there. Absolutely.
This serves as a fantastic transition to the upcoming chapter in which Steve Cohen, a hedge fund manager, states that the American economy is probably going to face a 1.5 situation. This growth rate is approximately the lowest we've experienced in quite a while. That's quite a statement indicating that America is actually going backwards. At least they expect to go backwards, especially when you look at the GDPnow tracker from the Atlanta Fed, which predicts negative growth for this quarter in America. They predict a 2.8% decline. This is, of course, also related to overspending, a reduction of that. Indeed, it significantly affects the US economy. Will we actually experience a kickback similar to Argentina's? What you see now with the simplification of regulations is that they are suddenly experiencing economic growth of nearly double digits. Or are we really facing a European scenario where America's just finished?
Thus, we are experiencing interesting times. I knew that the Biden administration has generally done a pretty good job economically. It's just that this is simply due to the citizens. I see it in the wallet. Plus, there has been inflation. When you look at the actual numbers, you think it's quite well done. Thus, at some point, they will have to answer for it. And of course, the government spends there. That makes absolutely no sense. You see how much money goes there daily. I lived in New York for half a year or so. Apparently, in Union Square, there's a huge counter that continuously produces numbers. And I wonder, is that four things? Do I need to check that out? That represents the national debt figure. It continuously increases without stopping. And then you genuinely consider that if you simply share this with the vast number of people living in America, you realize, okay, we can still draw some conclusions from this.
Yeah, I think so. Just stand there for a quarter of an hour. That's just insane.
You simply, then you considered your $5 cappuccino to be costly, and then you turn that door.
So, like this. That's indeed a very valid point. I sometimes wonder about that too, especially since 2008. Then came COVID. All the quantitative easing measures taken in both America and Europe. Tens of thousands of billions in euros and dollars. Wow. You know? I wonder about that too. How will that ever be settled? Or will it ultimately just be wiped out? That massive deficit in America. Will that remain? How will they resolve this? Strike it out? Is the goal really to erase that?
Yes, well, of course, the American dollar was indeed a trade currency. Let's see what unfolds with BRICS and the Soliabri initiative. They just want to move to a digital currency that isn't tied to the dollar. Interesting times again.
The dollarization. I wonder if that will actually work out. Trump has talked about it too. He will make everyone suffer if he stops using the dollar. I don't know his method. Fascinating times. Let me connect back to what Rowan just mentioned regarding the Middle East. We still have everything there, indeed. You often hear people say about Europe, it's very beautiful. You reside in a stunning museum. It's beautiful, but it's a museum. I hear you saying that it's not entirely true. I think it's good to perhaps focus on that a bit more. I just mentioned that all the big tech firms are in America, but we certainly don't have nothing here.
Big tech is being developed by big tech from the Netherlands. ASML.
ASML.
ASML is the center of everything happening now. Without ASML, Vida cannot operate, TSMC cannot operate, Samsung cannot, Intel cannot, etc. Don't forget this.
Indeed, that is correct.
No, but it is interesting. You quickly turn to the national debt, which currently stands at approximately 124% of the GDP of the United States, a significant figure. That is relatively high. Basically, if you examine Italy, it amounts to, in Greece, the year was 193 indeed. Belgium is also at 105. However, if you look back to where we were, say, at the end of during the Dutch VOC era, the guilder collapsed at 40% of the gross domestic product. Naturally, our capital market was far less developed than it is today. Indeed, we are the inventors of the stock market and cooperatives, among other things. But yes, the first is generally never the most successful. We see this now in startup land and in various other fields. The first is usually not the most successful.
Indeed, not successful. The Netherlands, folks, is undeniably a paradise on earth. We rank in many areas among the top 10. We have a very good social security. Thus, we are performing exceptionally.
Yes, true, but we haven't been able to maintain that world power, and maybe we shouldn't have wanted to. That's the flip side of the situation. From across the ocean, we observe what it means to manage such power, and that might not always make you very happy.
On the other hand, Roman, we still have world power in several areas. In trade and food, we are by far the most significant and innovative. Thus, we still resemble a small nation. I just got a smart TV and I watch YouTube occasionally. There's a lovely video titled "This Country is one of the smallest can still compete on the global stage." I think, click it. A lot is said about the Netherlands. None is Dutch, not made by the Netherlands. But it's a beautiful story about how we've been in trade worldwide for 300, 400 years. That always makes you feel a bit prouder of the Dutch. But alas, we are Dutch, so we can also be nice sometimes.
Oh, that's right.
Take a look, and as you observe that monetary world power, it keeps shifting each time. And what you see, the people who write a lot about it always look back. Thus, they examine the timeline, starting with the Netherlands, then England, and China has had its time, followed by America, which they illustrate with a timeline. That's right. Everyone puts a timeline below and attempts to forecast the future using historical data. Because everyone is looking at who will become, as if it were one country, who will be the new world currency or the new world power. I believe we are not moving into that stage. I believe that what Mark is saying is absolutely correct. It is indeed falling apart. But everyone keeps holding on to their own little things. The Netherlands stays strong in trade. America continues to excel in its strengths. At this moment, Trump is very good at imposing tariffs and pushing people around and insulting them. You frequently observe the English. They were once adept at land grabbing, but now they excel in diplomatic relations. You usually have a solid understanding of the banking narrative. Thus, you can see they have their niche. The Germans have dominated a significant portion of the automotive industry for a long time. Notice that Elon Musk currently holds a large share in electric vehicles. I am quite intrigued to see how things will fall into place for everyone. So, energy will be a very hot topic. The one who possesses the essential resources will have the power. So oil, electricity, maybe new energy, and also water, for example. I expect that drinking water will become increasingly scarce due to all the pollution we cause.
So that's what I wanted to mention. The Netherlands is by far the best.
In wastewater treatment. I believe we can find some innovative ideas in the market. But I also don't see America falling apart completely and having nothing to say anymore, that it suddenly goes to China or Russia. I think you will actually get a consortium of countries that will seize power in certain ways. The Middle East is really making significant strides in entrepreneurship and innovation. They desire that. The battle for knowledge is very much alive. Initially you saw that America was very much involved, China, and now you see that the Middle East is very much a front runner in this. They want to bring in all that knowledge with various incentives in entrepreneurship. They don't want the best universities. They just want people who have graduated and want to build great companies. So, you see a breakdown of markets. The Middle East has power through oil. They want to innovate. America had power with the dollar. They must engage in innovation. Russia shows that innovation is essential for them. China.
There you find more balance. I was particularly focused on a beautiful book, Globalization 4.0 by Milton Friedman. It actually predicts this too, that you will increasingly find balance in a scale. If one side tips, the other needs to adjust accordingly. I think that is healthy. I don't see that as healthy. Having an overarching power, I think it is never healthy, as we have seen what that brings in the past. Thus, I believe it's beneficial to have more power dynamics at play.
Advocating for a multipolar approach. This is, of course, a very hot issue in America. What I saw the Biden administration struggling with is that they didn't want, in my opinion, to share power with, for instance, Russia and China. That last aspect remains a concern. Trump, too, seems to be reducing involvement in the Ukraine conflict. Europe must figure it out for itself. Yes, but why? Because all resources must head towards the Pacific. Due to the fact that Trump is still struggling significantly with the notion of facing a genuine competitor globally. Red has, and that refers to China. I fully agree with what you are saying right now, without a doubt. Multipolarity means we have several major players in the world. It can only produce balance and true innovation, because competition fosters innovation. I think we all agree on that. However, I'm not completely certain if the Americans would perceive it that way. No way. Yes, they often don't see me. No, that's also pretty risky. To be honest, I have been quite worried about the consequences and the aftermath, let's put it that way, of the Ukraine war. I'm concerned now.
Put it on principle, right? Because I still find that quite a thing indeed. France is considering deploying nuclear-capable fighters in Germany. Well, that's definitely a provocative move. Well, an interview has also come out online with Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. He stated that Putin is firmly opposed to a European peacekeeping force because of the rhetoric Europe is currently using. There are many interesting points made in that interview. It's certainly a recommendation to check out. But that gets us going. I believe we are somewhat sidelined if we simply adopt a positive outlook and focus on the opportunities that exist for Europe rather than just now. Yes, for everyone, America is sitting this one out, which feels a bit immature. That political approach isn't effective and will only hinder us, not fostering the innovations we seek. We focus on innovation. We're not cynical. It's a looming issue.
I believe Europe could fulfill the perfect role as a bridge among virtually all global players. Given our central location, do business with everyone. Simply put, it's just about business. With China, with Russia, with India, with America, with everyone. I don't know to what extent, and I think you mean this too, Rowan, how handy choosing sides is right now. And you can see that the Americans are actually saying, well, we are certainly not siding with you anymore. That is indeed very interesting and a bit concerning. And although it isn't really necessary, I believe. Let's indeed, and this is something you are hearing a bit now, Europe must have a decide on the position that you prefer. I totally agree. Lukashenko indeed states that as well, if I interpret his words correctly. Yes, that's what
I
it
am
is.
truly surprised by how little we recognize the strength we can possess and embody as Europe. It always remains a bit like America's lapdog, and we look to Germany. I often think about how you are essentially a vast continent filled with numerous countries and economies. Indeed. People view Europe as if we possess great capabilities and privileges. We don't use that position at all, because we are actually always a bit too reserved, and maybe, as Dirk rightly says, too lazy now.
Yes, there's another aspect I notice in the Middle East and also in other places, including America. In the end, someone says, you are like a museum, but a very beautiful one. Well, that's quite a harsh thing to say, of course. In fact, everyone aspires to be like Europe. The culture, style, design, and lifestyle of Western Europe are things everyone looks up to. Very honestly put. From Milan to Amsterdam, Paris, and London.
Indeed. Dutch innovation combined with French temperament. All in one product, if possible.
Great.
Ultimately, they all want Arabs, Russians. They all send their children to London and Switzerland and so on. Yes, what could be the reason for that? We have so much potential within us. The reason I mention this is that I still have concerns about the significant divide that is currently emerging between Russia and Europe. And that involves taking sides. I find that quite difficult. All right. Some key principles need to be considered. Should we say, all right, Mr. Putin, forget Ukraine. Let's just go ahead and do business with you. That's what Trump is suggesting. But Europe has a completely different view. These are genuine dilemmas that we ought to talk about more frequently in this podcast, because it evolves day by day. However, there are truly major questions of this era that worry me. Do you believe we should simply engage in trade with Russia? In my personal view, and this is just my opinion, I believe that's a smart move. And I think you can also link that to a number of agreements with the Russians about how to interact internationally. But it's really about how we relate to each other. I'm afraid Mr. Trump recently showed in his conversation with Zelensky that this is not all taken for granted from his perspective. These are certainly ways of doing things that were quite rare until very recently. Everything is in motion. I believe that Europe can serve as a bridge connecting all continents together.
We did well at that. Trump has done this earlier. In fact, the way he dealt with Zelensky is clearly described in his book, The Art of the Deal. It was actually like this.
Indeed.
Yes, that was precisely the case.
It's all been orchestrated. From the start, I could see G-Default was being cornered just slightly. Zelensky has simply fallen into the trap, perfectly organized and orchestrated.
And all of Europe is falling into the trap, in my opinion, because they all think we need to take this on. We will do this now. And indeed, innovation does come from defense spending, but ultimately we are being harnessed to draw out that conflict, to lure out the rest of the world and make friends again. This was evident in the UN. It almost appears that Europe is opposing the major powers now. The major powers are Russia, China, and the United States.
That is exactly what you wanted.
Maybe we ought to consider sending some booklets to the Eurotop conference. Art of the Deal. That would be worth reading again.
We have kind of brought that upon ourselves. We mentioned it yesterday. I can't recall where I saw it, but I believe we all have read it. That comparison of Europe having 400 million people asking America with 300 million people to defend against Russia, which has 150 million people. What is not going well here? That is quite strange. That is a very strange situation.
Europe is still not regarded as a single nation. So you have various loudmouths as leaders, and not really a central strong leader like Russia and America have. Consequently, you always receive a blurred picture and an unclear response.
Hello, Ursula von der Leyen.
No, I can't say anything about that since this is a public podcast. That can't be allowed. No, but you know, that is indeed what I observe happening. Look, yes, they certainly have some idealistic ideas without a doubt. However, the Russians and the Chinese are purely driven by business. And what you see in Brussels, in my opinion, is a principle-driven discussion. It's a discussion based on political ideals. And that stands in stark contrast to the ruthless business mindset of the other major powers. And I don't think you'll ever manage it that way.
I am uncertain, and that reflects the identity of Europe. I believe it is ultimately more beneficial for us to enter together rather than having one person on the left and another on the right side.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah,
And on
Mark.
the other hand, you can see this article from Rothschild, for example. Indeed, we are being directed there, perhaps by America. I mean, this is undeniably very American, being sent to a more transactional world. And a world politics that is increasingly transactional, in which Rothschild states in that article that we should use raw materials much more as transactions and much less as a geopolitical game for other interests. And we should focus more on what we actually require. I find it absurd that Germany still hasn't learned from this. Just look at how much suffering they endured from their resource war, which has turned into the Ukraine war for them. Shouldn't we return to first principles and simply determine what is necessary, what we can obtain and what we cannot, but what we will purchase? Highland is the American solution.
From my perspective, it is.
I also feel that
For several hundred years, we were permitted to remain off the coast of Japan, uniquely involved in trade activities. That we just state we had something to offer them and they had something for us. No need for land grabbing here. We waive not to bring faith like Portugal, but we simply want to do business. It's nothing to do with me.
Trump is saying that as well, really. That is, without a doubt, highly transactional in nature.
It's absurd. I visited Namibia in a slum and spoke with the locals there. They all speak English. It's remarkable that the government has declared that with our resources, we have a massive diamond mine. We guarantee that everyone learns English, but that doesn't mean everyone gets a higher level. They are educated. Schools have been built everywhere, but even there, they still talk about the Dutch, about how the Dutch wanted to trade. Then the Germans just came and took everything. It was a German colony for a long time. And yes, naturally, its own history ensued. However, we are indeed recognized as Dutch for our engagement in trade activities. And certainly these are also...
Transactional and not possessive.
I personally have my own businesses.
Absolutely. Naturally, Indonesia serves as an example of this. I frequently travel to Cape Town. I also have a business there and once started a startup accelerator. Cape Town was originally a colony established by the Dutch. We had what you could call a city bowl. We had a few words of land and we had a little castle there, and that was trade. People crossed the mountain with our half business, but we never aimed to conquer the rest of South Africa.
Have departed. As a result of the invasion, the expansionist drive of the English, of the British Empire.
I did have English, but we only wanted to trade. For a few hundred years, we have been trade partners with China and Japan, the only trading partners because we only wanted to engage in trade with no push, more transactional. I think there's nothing wrong with it anymore.
Yes, slavery is certainly a dark chapter in that history.
You must see that too. Absolutely. Horrible things occur. Slavery has existed for 3,000 years. In Africa, there has also been slavery among villages. If you attacked a village, the other village would retaliate. They were also put on a ship, reduced to a mere commodity. The Dutch joyfully joined in on this, for sure. That cannot be justified, but it reflects the spirit of the time.
Yes, this was a key factor in the Roman Empire's existence.
I recognize that a group of volunteers didn't build the pyramids.
One could also reason that a more bipolar world, which we are heading towards, might not be entirely wrong. and that we indeed seek more local solutions, focusing on innovation rather than trying to create a TikTok that no one values, that anyone values. Such matters.
Indeed, and I sincerely hope that Europe can play that role in the global economy. We need to concentrate on solutions that genuinely benefit the planet. And we should direct our focus on this with Europe. Moreover, we require more food and clean water, emphasizing infrastructure significantly more than yet another trivial tech and TikTok, where genuinely no one, where absolutely no one is better off, is gained from it.
Yes, exactly.
I must go. I truly enjoyed it. Otherwise, I will be late for my appointment to be continued. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Yep. See you later.
All right, let's continue with... We actually call it a podcast based on financial markets and investing, geopolitics, innovation, and energy. I believe that connection was already established. This week, Mark made an incredible find in Finland that amazed everyone. So I'll bring it up, Mark, and hand it over to you.
It's interesting how that goes. We frequently mention electric energy as an alternative. Well, Rowan and I have also talked about hydrogen. There are hydrogen fueling stations in the Netherlands, I know. It's not very popular yet. There are hydrogen vehicles from Toyota and others driving around. Almost no one mentions it, but there are also a few energy sources that are significantly more efficient. I've always been interested in the nuclear energy discussion. I find it interesting because we had beautiful nuclear plants that aren't really that dangerous in perspective. There have been 3 significant incidents worldwide. But when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. But for the people who are already against it, we can use thorium for that. In my opinion, it is 200 times more efficient and generates little to no nuclear waste. You can have small power plants. It's very efficient. A thorium plant can produce 100 to 200 times the energy of a uranium plant. You still need a little bit of uranium. However, those are extremely efficient sources of energy to investigate and develop further. The only problem with that is often the time factor. The process of developing such an energy source on a worldwide scale may take anywhere from 10 to 50 years.
During the Second World War, uranium was favored for bomb production because of its effectiveness in creating explosives. As a result, it is very clear that this promotes innovation, leading to the establishment of nuclear power plants. Indeed, thorium is considered a safer alternative in this context. However, it is not as straightforward to utilize for bomb production. Actually not, but such innovations do fall behind for years. Although it is certainly related to the development process and the quantity of uranium required, there's really nothing you can do with that, so to say. You need to rob quite a few of those thorium power plants, steal from them. Are you aiming to achieve a notable quantity of uranium? So yes, we really need to focus on these kinds of things indeed.
I find it such a shame because hydrogen is not new. It has existed for decades. In my opinion, thorium has existed for a century already. However, that area is not being invested in due to various financial and political factors. Does that play a part too? Yes, that, but also with towers, for example. Every scientist and technician in favor of towers opposes nuclear energy and the other way around. So they are against uranium and vice versa. Thus, there are simply 2 opposing sides. If one camp has been developed for 60 years and the other is in its infancy, then good luck catching up. So you see that there is often a very political landscape, which hinders further development, and that is being prevented from moving forward. There are hydrogen cars too. Hydrogen vehicles are significantly better, cleaner, more efficient, and less expensive. Indeed, we have plenty of water as well. Then it becomes a bit of a chicken-egg situation.
Hydrogen is not as easy to produce as water, of course. However, I believe that what Dirk briefly referred to is primarily related to the culture and the geopolitical landscape of our time. What I mean is, why can Elon Musk successfully set up a full electric infrastructure? Since he can acquire nearly all the capital available globally, thanks to the economic incentives present in America. And indeed, the venture capital that we lack in Europe means we invest significantly less. Therefore, when a company presents something like that, there are indeed several examples. I mean, the BMW 7 Series was already constructed using hydrogen technology back in the late 2000s, and we were pioneers in that field. However, there is not a single BMW that then says we now have the incentive to simply set up countless hydrogen stations. Then prices will drop, but you won't get those investors involved. And that was in a quite conservative Germany, of course. But yes, if that step had been taken, there would have never been room for a Tesla. Then Elon would have had to restrict himself to rockets, where he is also quite skilled. But that would have presented a whole different world.
Yeah.
Yes, there are interests that develop over time and begin to dictate decisions. I want to toss a stone into the fire. To me, solar and wind energy is just nonsense. I'm saying it very loudly. Good for the discussion. Nonsense. You are covering the whole country with wind turbines and solar farms, each of which has a significantly short lifespan. They cost a lot of money and are never recouped. And then you have, on the other side, the thorium discussion that is already 50, 60 years old. It is known that it exists and that it is possible. That holds true by itself. Indeed. Nuclear. What is politics doing? A couple of years back, Angela Merkel addressed the situation after Fukushima, all of them closing. Those were decisions driven by emotion, maybe influenced by other interests. I'm not sure. But for me, those are, I feel like a stone in the water each time. This is what this podcast aims to do. Completely wrong decisions. Get lost with your wind energy. It makes no sense at all. For my part, say it expressively and strongly.
Certainly. What I find extraordinary is that we are having a conversation about thorium, and you just displayed that article from Finland. It's just a tiny article, not much attention paid to it. However, it is casually mentioned that there are ongoing experiments with thermal energy in Finland. Thermal energy, for anyone unaware, refers to the process of utilizing the heat from the Earth's crust to create energy. This is so powerful that it has been supplying the planet with energy for tens of thousands of years, and it has the potential to do so for millions of years to come. The unique aspect is that such energy sources often offer answers to the complete energy dilemma, while also frequently resolving environmental challenges. And I wonder, why are we know the answer, economic interests, but why aren't these things just, why not focus solely on that?
In my opinion, they are not economic interests. Because if there is a business case, there is a business case. And if that business case exists, then capital will flow there. The complete conversation, which truly frustrates me, revolves around the idea that everyone assumes capitalism is the main villain responsible for our existing challenges, and that is absolutely true. Not at all. Capitalism has been absent here for a long time due to this example. Capitalism is expected to result in discovering the optimal yield, consequently investing in these types of projects to reach a reduced price, a price that is competitive and attractive in the end. This results in improved energy production. But that's not how it works. We do not have a system that is solely capitalist. Of course, there are disadvantages to it, but there are more advantages than the ones we are currently combining it with. A socialist concept that emphasizes focus much more on the socialist interest rather than the innovation interest, since innovation and socialism cannot coexist. Essentially, yes, we've demonstrated to several countries that this combination doesn't work.
Would you be willing to state, Rowan, that solar and wind energy are primarily non-capitalist driven phenomena resulting from principled decisions by politicians globally? I would dare to make that assumption.
If you ask any engineer, they will say this isn't the optimal solution.
Well, here we are all of a sudden. I agree with that. This is blasphemy in The Hague.
For sure. I find solar energy beautiful, but it is simply polluting and energy intensive.
No, but we don't want to acknowledge that. We would rather subsidize every farmer with a huge array of solar panels, only to later inform them that they need to close their operations elsewhere because their cows are producing methane gas. Indeed, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. And if you just tell them, yes, guys, we are going to expand the caps, and we will approach this in a contemporary manner. So, in my view, that is a far more sensible option. And you shouldn't do that in the old way of building that reactor. You need to do it in new ways, and there are plenty of examples of that.
Yes, they have those small reactors or those small factories.
No, of course, there are options. However, I believe the best and worst examples are right here. Just a moment ago, it was mentioned to me, the debate about nuclear energy in Germany, which has simply unfolded all at once. The power was turned off, I think, because of a decision made by one politician, Mrs. Merkel, in response to the Fukushima incident. That's just pure emotion. The energy movement from the 1980s that continues to have a slight presence. but those have really been significant decisions. And that's how you see them being made on Sundays. There are many alternatives. I believe this will be a theme that comes up often in this podcast, because energy is, I believe, one of the most important drivers of our entire society.
And innovation is the solution. I believe that is indeed the main point. Yes, well, great gentlemen, thank you very much. Westlink has already stepped out, our king of startups. Overall, I believe we had a truly wonderful discussion, and there will certainly be a lot going on in this ever-changing world. I mean, Trump will probably shout something again that we can discuss. Regarding the list, we will react in a way that makes us wonder, what are you up to? Or suddenly becomes clear. Who knows what will happen this coming week, but we will keep you updated next week on how we view this world and where we find returns. We can locate where we, as yield seekers, look for opportunities, where we need to go as entrepreneurs, as investors. We hope to see you again next week. And thank you very much for this week. Thank you.
A nice session. Thank you, everyone.
See you later.